For more on the crisis in Ukraine, I'm joined by William Courtney. He's a former U.S. ambassador to Kazakhstan and Georgia. He's now a senior fellow at the RAND Corporation, a Washington think tank. Sir, thank you for being with us on the program. Let me begin with Putin's comments, where he was recorded saying he could take Kiev in 2 weeks. And now there's some damage control going on in Moscow, with Kremlin saying, well, his comments were taken out of context. What do you make of the comments, if in fact he did say it, and could it have bigger implications here, and why would he say something like that?
President Putin has a history of making comments, sometimes in private, sometimes in public, that are a bit shocking, and they're often walked back. For example, once he told President George W. Bush at an international meeting that Ukraine really isn't a country. Well, then they walked that back after a bit. It's possible the Russians could go to Kiev in 2 weeks. Militarily, but if they did, there would be high costs. So they would lose a lot of soldiers.
So we heard from NATO last week. They said they had surveillance videos showing Russian troops and tanks, about 1,000 Russian troops in eastern Ukraine. If Putin, in fact, wanted to invade Ukraine, would he only send 1,000 troops? I mean, wouldn't he send a much larger contingent to show we have the military might?
Well, this has been the puzzling thing about Russia's policy toward Ukraine for the last 6 months. There have been several occasions in which Russia looked like it wanted to invade. At one point, it built up to 40,000 troops opposite Ukraine's border. Then it built back down again. Then it built up again. So it shows hesitancy. Public opinion polls in Russia show that Russians are opposed to the idea of an armed invasion of Ukraine. President Putin, the Kremlin, are saying that Russian soldiers are not there. That's primarily for domestic consumption in Russia, because the international community knows full well that the soldiers are there.
So Putin has said, or not Putin necessarily himself, but Russia has dismissed the allegations of having any troops in Ukraine, saying they're Russian volunteers. Do you believe anyone in Russia buys that?
I hope they don't, but unfortunately, state-controlled television is the way most Russians get their news, so probably some of them do. Some of the Russian statements have said that, well, the soldiers have taken their vacation and they're fighting in Ukraine only for vacation. Other Russian statements talked about some Russian soldiers losing their way into Ukraine. So none of these things is a really solid explanation.
So, Ambassador Courtney, what is the solution here? I mean, certainly it doesn't seem like sanctions have been a deterrent for Putin. What should the international community be doing to diffuse this crisis?
Well, there are two basic ways to proceed. One is to expand sanctions. The European Union cautioned over the weekend that if Russia doesn't pull back within a week, that sanctions will be expanded. The other way is for the West to help Ukraine repel Russian invaders. So far, Western countries have been unwilling to provide anti-armor or anti-air weaponry to Ukraine. They've provided some other information, including intelligence and surveillance type information. So the West really faces a challenge. Is it going to up the ante in Ukraine? For example, in Iraq, the United States is flying combat air missions on behalf of the government of Iraq. But with Ukraine, the West has essentially an arms embargo on significant weaponry supplies to Ukraine.
So do you think the sanctions so far have been really effective?
They've had more impact than people thought. The sanctions have been weak in part because of compromises among all the 28 members of the European Union. But they've spooked a lot of investors. So there's been massive capital flight from Russia. If the sanctions are expanded, there will be more. So economic damage could be significant.
Ambassador Bill Courtney, sir, thank you so much.
You're quite welcome.